George A. Romero didn't just make zombie films, he revolutionized horror cinema and used it to say something. From his groundbreaking debut that redefined monsters to his collaborations with Stephen King, Romero proved genre filmmaking could be smart, political, and uncompromising without sacrificing visceral impact. But beyond the Living Dead trilogy that made him a legend, Romero explored suburban witchcraft, government conspiracy, medieval idealism, and psychological terror. He worked in Pittsburgh when everyone else chased Hollywood, built practical effects that still hold up decades later, and never stopped using horror as a lens to examine American society's failures. Some of these films changed cinema forever. Others were commercial failures that found cult audiences later. All of them bear Romero's fingerprints. Social commentary wrapped in genre thrills, practical craftsmanship over shortcuts, and a refusal to look away from humanity's ugliest impulses. 10 essential George A. Romero films, the master of independent horror at his most vital. Night of the Living Dead, 1968. George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead didn't just terrify audiences in 1968. It reshaped the entire landscape of horror cinema. Shot on a shoestring budget in rural Pennsylvania, this black-and-white nightmare introduced the modern zombie to the world, blending raw social commentary with relentless dread. What began as a small independent project became a cultural earthquake that still shakes the genre decades later. The story unfolds with chilling simplicity. A brother and sister visiting a cemetery are suddenly attacked by strange, shambling figures. Barbara, the sister, flees to a nearby farmhouse, where she and a handful of strangers barricade themselves inside. As night falls, the house becomes a fortress under siege, with the group torn apart not only by the horde outside, but by fear, distrust, and clashing personalities within. Dwayne Jones, as Ben, delivers a groundbreaking performance, one of the first times a black actor led a horror film without his race being explicitly addressed, making his quiet strength and intelligence all the more striking. Judith O'Dea's Barbara embodies shock and despair, while Carl Hardman's Harry Cooper adds combustible tension as a man whose selfishness threatens the fragile unity of the group. Romero wrings suspense from every creaking floorboard and shadowed window, balancing moments of silence with sudden shocking bursts of violence. Beyond the scares, Night of the Living Dead captured the turbulence of its time. The film's bleak tone and devastating ending mirrored the anxieties of a world on edge. Its influence cannot be overstated. The film birthed the zombie genre as we know it, inspiring countless sequels, remakes, and imitators. Yet no amount of gore or spectacle in later films has quite matched the stark, claustrophobic terror of Romero's original. With its Season of the Witch, 1972. A suburban housewife trapped in an empty marriage begins experiencing disturbing dreams filled with violence and occult imagery. Her daily life offers no control, only routine, dismissal, and quiet resentment. Looking for power she can't find at home, she becomes drawn to witchcraft, attending classes and experimenting with spells. What begins as curiosity slowly becomes obsession, as empowerment and psychological fracture start to blur together. The film is less about spells than dissatisfaction. Jan White delivers a restrained, unsettling performance as Joan, playing repression that gradually curdles into anger and fantasy. Her relationships are defined by indifference and condescension, and the people around her barely register her presence until it's too late. George A. Romero approaches the material as psychological drama rather than genre spectacle. The witchcraft is deliberately ambiguous. Rituals unfold through dream logic, nightmares bleed into waking life, and reality is never clearly defined. Effects are minimal, relying on symbolic imagery, sudden violence, and mood. Suburban Pennsylvania is framed as a quiet trap, where comfort becomes confinement. Season of the Witch is uneven and slow, but unusually sincere. It lacks the visceral impact of Romero's zombie films, yet it's openly concerned with female autonomy and the dangerous appeal of forbidden power. More thoughtful than its reputation suggests, it's a flawed but revealing experiment. Social horror scaled down to the level of domestic suffocation. The Crazies, 1973. A small Pennsylvania town is quietly poisoned when a military bioweapon contaminates the local water supply. Some residents die violently. Others don't die at all. They become unpredictable, aggressive, and dangerous. Before anyone understands what's happening, the U.S. Army seals the town, cutting off escape routes and enforcing quarantine with live ammunition. Infected or not, civilians are treated as expendable. The breakdown comes fast. Neighbors turn on each other. Soldiers follow orders that grow more brutal by the hour. Families are separated, suspects are executed, and containment becomes an excuse rather than a goal. The infected aren't monsters. They're confused, terrified people acting on impulse, which makes every confrontation feel tragic instead of heroic. The film's violence is blunt and chaotic. Civilians are gunned down by soldiers. Infected attack with everyday tools. Panic spreads faster than the illness itself. Practical effects focus on blood, confusion, and sudden death rather than spectacle. Hazmat suits and military checkpoints dominate the imagery, transforming familiar rural spaces into occupied territory. Romero uses the outbreak as a vehicle for institutional collapse. The Crazies isn't about survival. It's about failure. No one is in control, and no one is honest about that fact. Rough, angry, and deeply paranoid, it's Romero at his most confrontational, a film that insists the real horror isn't infection, but authority with no plan and no accountability. The Amusement Park, 1975. An elderly man navigates a nightmarish amusement park where every attraction becomes a metaphor for the indignities, violence, and institutional cruelty inflicted upon the elderly in American society. What appears to be a simple day at the park transforms into a surreal journey through dehumanization, neglect, and systematic abuse. Directed by George A. Romero and commissioned by the Lutheran Service Society as an educational film about ageism, The Amusement Park is one of the most disturbing films ever made, and it was deemed too intense to be shown upon completion, remaining unreleased for decades. Romero takes the framework of a PSA and transforms it into psychological horror that's more unsettling than any zombie film he ever made. Lincoln Mazel, a non-professional actor, plays the elderly protagonist with heartbreaking vulnerability. He moves through the park's attractions, each one revealing another form of elder abuse, from financial exploitation to medical neglect to outright physical violence, with increasing confusion and despair. The performance is raw and genuine, making every humiliation land with uncomfortable force. Romero shoots the amusement park as a fever dream, using disorienting angles, harsh lighting, and overlapping sound design to create sensory overload. The attractions become increasingly nightmarish. A bumper car sequence turns into vehicular assault. A fortune teller delivers crushing mortality statistics. A motorcycle gang physically attacks the elderly for sport. Nothing is subtle. Everything is deliberately excessive. But the exaggeration reveals uncomfortable truths. The film's relentless bleakness and uncompromising vision made it unsaleable as educational material. But as horror cinema, it's devastatingly effective. The amusement park proves that real horror doesn't need supernatural elements, just an honest look at how society treats its most vulnerable. Martin, 1977. He says there's no magic, just needles, razor blades, and a hunger he can't name. In a gray steel town, a quiet young man believes he's a vampire. Or maybe he's just sick and alone. Either way, people keep dying, and he keeps telling himself he's not a monster. Not exactly. The film sticks close to Martin's point of view, building a world of late-night trains, empty kitchens, and bedrooms where fear arrives softly. Black and white reveries cut through the present like faded memories, or fantasies of cloaks and castles that may never have been real. The contrast is the point. The old myths are beautiful, but the truth is clinical, tragic, and human. Performances are delicate, especially from the lead, whose calm voice and stillness make every scene feel like a confession. The direction is intimate and unmannered, letting ordinary spaces carry extraordinary dread. Instead of grand Gothic spectacle, you get hallways, telephones, and the hum of appliances. Its legacy rests in empathy, a horror story that refuses easy answers, neither romanticizing nor demonizing its subject. It's disturbing because it feels possible, a portrait of isolation that lingers long after the credits, asking whether evil is in the blood, the brain, or the world that won't make room for you. Dawn of the Dead, 1978. George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead is more than just a sequel to Night of the Living Dead. It's a sprawling, ambitious expansion that cemented the modern zombie as both a source of terror and biting social commentary. Where the first film trapped its survivors in a farmhouse, this one takes the apocalypse to a shopping mall, turning consumer culture itself into a backdrop for horror. The story follows a small group of survivors, a TV news producer, her pilot boyfriend, and 2 SWAT officers, as they escape the chaos of civilization collapsing outside and fortify themselves inside the mall. At first, the brightly lit corridors and endless goods feel like paradise, a refuge from the violence consuming the world. But the illusion of safety crumbles as the dead break through. Rival survivors invade, and the group begins to fracture under the weight of their own isolation. Romero balances shocking gore with sharp satire. The zombies shuffle through the mall, not just as predators, but as mindless echoes of their former selves, drawn instinctively to the temples of consumerism they once worshipped. It's a critique of modern life that feels as relevant today as it did in the late 1970s. Special effects maestro Tom Savini brought groundbreaking practical gore to the film, making each bite, wound, and explosion of blood both horrifying and strangely exaggerated, like a comic book come to life. Combined with Romero's unflinching direction, the violence hits with both shock and dark humor, creating a tone that swings between bleak and playful. Dawn of the Dead endures not just for its scares, but for its scope. It's epic, grotesque, funny, and tragic all at once, a film that proves horror can carry both entertainment and commentary without losing its edge. The mall becomes a microcosm of society, a place where survival, greed, and the inevitability of death all collide. Knightriders, 1981. A traveling troupe of motorcycle riders tours rural Pennsylvania, staging full-contact medieval jousting tournaments. They live by a self-imposed code of chivalry, rejecting sponsorships, commercial shortcuts, and modern cynicism. Their leader, Billy, believes the troupe represents a true alternative society, built on honor, loyalty, and shared purpose. But as money pressures grow, and some members push for fame and profit, the group begins to fracture from within. George A. Romero directs his most personal film, using medieval spectacle to explore modern ideals. Ed Harris gives a committed, quietly intense performance as Billy, playing unwavering idealism as both noble and destructive. Tom Savini delivers one of his best acting roles as Morgan, a knight torn between loyalty to the code and the desire for recognition. The jousting sequences are staged entirely, with real motorcycles and real crashes. Bikes collide, riders hit the ground, and the danger is unmistakable. Romero shoots the tournaments with sincerity, treating motorcycle jousting as legitimate sport rather than novelty. Between events, the film focuses on internal politics, personal relationships, and the slow erosion of shared values. Knightriders is long, earnest, and unapologetically sincere. It's less about medieval fantasy than the cost of refusing to compromise in a world that demands it. Not horror, but essential Romero. An artist wrestling openly with integrity, independence, and inevitability. A true cult film, defined by conviction rather than accessibility. Creepshow, 1982. 5 short horror stories unfold like panels torn from a pulp comic book. Each one follows a familiar pattern. Flawed people make selfish choices, and something unpleasant comes back to collect. A murdered man returns for Father's Day revenge. A strange meteor crashes on a rural farm. A sealed crate holds something that shouldn't be fed. The setups are simple, and the outcomes are rarely subtle. The film leans heavily on tone and presentation. Everything is heightened but intentional, from the dialogue to the performances. The cast is stacked with recognizable faces: Hal Holbrook, Adrienne Barbeau, Leslie Nielsen, Ted Danson, along with Stephen King in front of the camera as an unlucky farmer. Performances stay mostly straight, letting the exaggerated situations speak for themselves rather than pushing for comedy. Visually, the movie commits fully to its comic book influence. Bright primary colors, hard shadows, and animated transitions separate each segment. Tom Savini's effects work is prominent throughout, favoring tactile makeup and practical creatures over realism. Rotting corpses, swarming insects, and creature attacks are presented with a deliberate artificiality that fits the style. Creepshow doesn't try to reinvent anthology horror. It sticks to simple morality tales and delivers them with confidence and consistency. It's playful, occasionally nasty, and designed to be revisited. Less about surprise, more about enjoying the ride through familiar, well-crafted scares. Day of the Dead, 1985. Humanity teeters on the brink of extinction. A military scientific team operates from a Florida missile silo, attempting to study zombies and develop a solution, while internal tensions spiral out of control. Dr. Logan experiments on captured zombies, particularly one named Bub, teaching him to mimic human behavior. Meanwhile, soldiers grow increasingly authoritarian, plotting mutiny as the undead breach the facility, leaving the last hope of survival in jeopardy. Day of the Dead is Romero at his most confined and uncompromising. Budget constraints force the focus onto tight, pressure cooker tension rather than the expansive satire of Dawn of the Dead. Laurie Cardille's Sarah serves as the moral anchor amid men unraveling under stress. Joe Pilato's Rhodes embodies ruthless militarism, while Richard Liberty's Dr. Logan balances ethics with obsessive scientific curiosity. Sherman Howard's Bub delivers unexpected pathos and humanity, forcing the audience to question what it truly means to be civilized. Tom Savini's gore effects reach new extremes. Dismemberments, brutal feeding sequences, and inventive deaths push the boundaries of on-screen horror. The fluorescent-lit silo exposes every grisly detail, heightening the sense of siege and desperation. Here the real threat emerges less from zombies than from human failings. Stubbornness, aggression, and ego drive the tragedy. Day of the Dead is a nihilistic meditation on humanity, suggesting that, in some ways, the undead may be morally superior to the survivors they outnumber. Monkey Shines, 1988. A promising athlete is left paralyzed from the neck down after a traffic accident, his independence suddenly gone. A scientist friend helps him regain some autonomy by providing a helper monkey named Ella, trained to assist with daily tasks. Unknown to him, Ella has been treated with an experimental neurological serum that dramatically increases her intelligence and creates a dangerous psychological link between them. As his frustration and rage grow, Ella begins acting on the dark impulses he can no longer express himself. George A. Romero directs a psychological horror that replaces large-scale threats with something intimate and unsettling. Jason Beghe gives a committed performance, conveying anger and helplessness through limited physical movement. Kate McNeil, John Pankow, and Joyce Van Patten round out the cast as people drawn into the fallout. The trained monkey performances are surprisingly effective, turning a small animal into a credible source of menace. The horror is rooted in vulnerability and dependency. Romero explores how resentment festers when autonomy is stripped away. Ella becomes the physical extension of that rage. The apartment setting reinforces the claustrophobia, turning a home into a trap. Monkey Shines is Romero working in a quieter, more psychological mode. It's uneven, but deeply uncomfortable in ways that linger. Less about spectacle than buried anger and loss of control, it's an overlooked entry that stands apart from his better-known work. If you love discovering forgotten horror and cult cinema, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the films time forgot. Thanks for watching. And remember, always be kind and rewind, because every movie is someone's favorite.